Hi, my name is Lisa Eschenbach, and I work with E3 Washington, and we believe that every student in Washington State should have an environmental experience that's relevant to their community and makes a difference in our world. So we're really excited to be here with all of these students. Raise your hand if you're over 20 and you came to your capital and you presented and got to meet the governor. If you're over 20. So I think we know how special today is for the students. So I really want to thank the students for being so attentive and a good audience. And now we're going to see how the adults do when it's on the other shoe. And I hope that they are good for you. I hope that you're able to take some deep breaths during your presentation. Don't be too nervous about it. We have presentations, as Jean mentioned, all around the room, but we have a select few groups that are going to actually come up and give us an oral presentation as well. And our first group is Bordeaux Elementary, and they are presenting on trees, forests, weathers, and seasons.
All right, good morning. My name is Laura Rhodes, and this is my partner teacher, Sherry Strickland. We teach kindergarten at Bordeaux Elementary in Shelton, and we're here today to share our project about trees, weather, forests, and seasons that we've developed through our partnerships with the Pacific Education Institute, the Cranberry Lake Foundation, and Green Diamond Resource Company. This project is a year-long investigation for students to teach the very basics of climate science through just introducing them to trees and the importance of trees and forests. And so we've brought 4 students here today to share with you. We have Fiona, Luke, Addison, and Jeffrey, and they're going to tell you all about what they've learned regarding trees, weather, forests, and seasons. All right, Fiona, you're first.
At the beginning of the year, my class adopted a tree, and we checked on it every season to see how it changed. We wrote pictures of it in our tree journals. And this is my tree journal of what it looked like in summer, fall, and winter. And right now it's winter, and the trees have no leaves, and we're really excited for spring because then the buds will open up and we'll have new leaves. This is when my class went to Cranberry Lake. We saw a nice lake. We got to walk on a trail. We learned about 5 different trees. We collected cones, barks, and leaves to bring back to school. Guess what damaged this tree? A woodpecker looking for food, which is bugs. Guess what killed all these trees? A beaver built a dam and flooded the trees. This blue mark on the tree means it's getting cut down. The orange mark means that scientists are using it. After coming back, we made tree jars. We use magnifying glasses, and then we look
looked closely at tree cookies and counted the rings. We wrote stories about Cranberry Lake. We grafted cones. We compared evergreen trees and deciduous trees in both. We learned that trees make oxygen and we breathe it in. We had tree cookies and we had magnifying glasses and we looked closely at the tree cookie and we counted the rings, and as many rings are, that's how old the tree is. And we made our own tree cookies, and as many rings as there are. I'm 6, so I have 6 rings on my tree cookie.
We learned about trees on point and research to make things out like tree houses, paper, and blocks. People from Green Diamond came and showed us how to manage forest by not cutting down too many trees at once. To keep the earth healthy, not recycling, not littering, and planting trees. I'm going to show you how to plant a tree. Any questions?
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions for our young scientists? Or they shared a lot of information with you. They've learned a lot in this unit, and we're not finished yet. We have plans to go back to Cranberry Lake for a follow-up investigation in a different season, and some more hands-on activities for them. Yes?
I'd like to ask this second little boy here,
Luke?
Junior.
Yep.
I'd like to ask him about the woodpecker. The woodpecker only pecks the tree to get a home, is that it?
What was the woodpecker
No.
looking for? Do you want to come over here?
Yeah.
What was he looking for?
The woodpecker was looking for food, which is bugs in the tree.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Great. Well, I hope people are going to use that planting technique sometime soon. We need a lot more trees. Our next presenters are with Lakeland Hills Elementary. They're doing their presentation on breathing easier, and their teacher is Alora Keith. And they're working with Washington Green Schools as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Sahar Arbab. I'm the Outreach Coordinator at Washington Green Schools. We're really excited to be here today. These wonderful third grade students from Lakeland Hills Elementary School are here to talk to you about what they learned from the curriculum Breathing Easier, which was implemented by their wonderful teacher, Laura Keith, in partnership with us, Washington Green Schools, and the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. So I'm going to turn it over to them. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sullivan, and today I'm going to be asking my friends here some questions about air pollution and how it's related to climate change.
Hi, my name is Seth. Hi, my name is
Okay, Seth, to start us off, can you please tell me what air pollution is?
Air pollution is chemicals in the air that makes it hard for people to breathe.
Ocean, why does air pollution concern you?
Because it's unhealthy for people to breathe and people can be severely hurt from it.
Seth, how are climate change and air pollution related?
For example, climate change is heating up the earth, which is causing more wildfires, which is putting smoke into the air, causing air pollution.
Ocean, what else besides wildfires causes air pollution in your community?
The three main things are cars, trains, and airplanes.
Seth, how can you protect yourself from air pollution?
You could check the air quality report, and if it's unhealthy, you could stay inside, or you could plant trees, or ask people to not idle.
Ocean, can you tell me a bit about how you monitored air quality at your school?
We used handheld air quality monitors to see how high the air pollution was.
Seth, what did you find out using these?
We figured out that the most polluted place in our school was the main entrance.
And why is that?
The cars idling outside were putting exhaust in the air, and whenever the front doors are opened, all that exhaust comes into the main entrance.
Ocean, how are you taking action?
We started a no idling campaign and put up metal signs that said no idling zone and we sent out emails to the parents so they could know what was happening at school.
In conclusion, air pollution is dangerous and so is idling, and that should not be permitted, especially at schools. Our hope is that you make it a state law for cars not to idle at schools. I hope you learned about air pollution and how it's related to climate change. Thank you.
Okay, I can say from experience that the things that students have asked me to do at these sessions, I will do. So I appreciate your call to action, and I think that you will find that the adults in this room will be thinking a little bit differently about idling from now on. So you've made an impact here, and it sounds like you've made a real impact in your school and in your community as well. Thank you for that presentation. Okay, we have Jason Lee Middle School with me right now, and they're going to talk about renewable energy, and their teacher is Kathy Hall. Come on out.
Hi, good morning. We're happy to be here. This was kind of a crazy experience because Jessica from PEI was like, Kathy, you really need to do this. So we started the project and then Snowmageddon hit. So everything's been a little bit crazy with all the days off school, but these three wonderful young ladies have put together a great presentation for you and are really kind of throwing down the gauntlet to make some big changes. So enjoy.
Hello, I'm Sammy, and I'd like to thank you all for letting us present our presentation to you. And
I'm Gwen.
And I'm Annie. And today we're talking about renewable energy. We're 8th graders at Jason Lee, and we're talking about how Washington schools can benefit from using solar panels.
So, what is renewable energy? Renewable energy is energy that is generated from natural resources that are continuously replenished. This includes sunlight, geothermal heat, wind, tides, water, and various forms of biomass. This energy cannot be exhausted and is constantly renewed. Renewable energy is currently booming as innovation brings down costs and starts to deliver on the promise of a cleaner future.
The main source of renewable energy we're going to be focusing on today is solar energy. So, what is solar energy? Solar energy is light and heat from the sun harnessed by using photovoltaic cells to produce electrical energy. Solar energy is the cleanest and most abundant renewable energy source available. Solar technologies can harness this energy for a variety of uses, including generating energy, providing light or a comfortable interior environment, and heating water for domestic, commercial, or industrial use.
How can we introduce solar to Washington, or more specifically, Washington schools? There are 2,370 public schools in Washington. 56 of those schools use solar panels. If we were to place just an average of 20 solar panels on every public school, we could create an average of 13.8 million kilowatts. While we know that solar panels might not be suitable for every school in Washington, schools that are fit for solar panels can compensate.
So now you may be wondering, where would we even begin? Well, we should learn from schools who have already made this into a reality. In 2015, Arletta School in Portland, Oregon installed a 151 kilowatt solar array on their school. They partnered with Portland General Electric Renewable Development Fund, their customers, and the Energy Trust of Oregon. Along with Arletta School, the Portland General Electric Renewable Development Fund also installed solar arrays on 5 other Portland schools: Arletta School, James John Elementary, Brittlemile Elementary, Laurelhurst Hosford Middle School, and Wilson High School. Altogether, they created 1.2 megawatts. If they made this into a reality at so many other schools, why shouldn't Washington do the same?
So this is our school, Jason Lee. Jason Lee is an example of an ideal location to place solar panels. Our roofs are completely unobstructed and would be perfect for 300 solar panels, which can produce 90,000 kilowatts. This installation would prevent over 100,000 pounds of CO2 emissions.
The largest human source of CO2 emissions is from the combustion of fossil fuels in power plants. This produces 87% of human carbon dioxide emissions. Anything involving fossil fuels has a carbon dioxide emission ticket attached. For example, burning these fuels releases energy, but carbon dioxide also gets produced as a byproduct. With solar energy, there would be many more benefits that there currently are with power plants. If we use solar energy, it would be cost efficient and reduce CO2 emissions, which is better for the environment. It would also greatly benefit the health of the community. Schools are used during the day, meaning solar energy could be a great option because solar panels will generate energy where and when it's used. And lastly, it creates learning opportunities for everyone, but especially for students.
Making this a reality requires support from the entire Washington community. We would need funding from state incentives, sponsors, and grant money and private investors. Once we have figured out the logistics of everything, we could take it up with the school boards. However, we would need the school boards and superintendents to be open to change and opportunity.
We greatly appreciate Washington's efforts to make this community a brighter and cleaner place, but we should also be open to more ideas for a sustainable future for all. We need to remember that solar technology is available whenever. We just have to be ready for it. Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions for us? Thank you so much. Oh, yeah.
You said your next step started trying to figure out how to get the school board or an organization to help fund to make this a reality. Have you taken, have you done anything to set up a meeting or a date to speak to the school board?
After this event, the next step would be talking to the school board and our principal and people in administrative positions to figure out the best next step.
So you set up an appointment already, or you're going to?
We are going to.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you described that this is cost effective. If it's cost effective, why do you think that there are barriers to implementing it? What do you see are some of the challenges?
Definitely convincing the school boards and superintendents. However, I think that if we have all the logistics figured out, then I think they'll definitely get on board.
Any other questions in the audience? Yeah, one back there.
Does your estimate of how much energy this will produce account for poor weather in Washington?
Yes. We do know that we can still collect some solar energy in the darker months. It's not as efficient, but it still works.
Thank you.
So the governor is going to be particularly excited about this. So he's really doing a lot for clean energy in the Washington state. Our next presenters are from Ellensburg. I'm going to give you guys a little heads up that you're next. And they're going to be presenting on beaver activity and habitat. The teacher is Jeff Hashimoto, and they came, again, all the way from Ellensburg over the passes. So welcome.
Hi, I'm Reese Brady.
I'm Nicholas Glee.
I'm Alice Miller.
And I'm Rowan Yitzinger, and we're here to talk to you about beaver activity as an indicator of habitat quality.
There we go. All right, so in 2011, the Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group spent $1.1 million in 2011 restoring the Reeser Creek floodplain. So the focus on this was the floodplain function to enhance habitat for different organisms that live there and provide educational and recreational opportunities. So before this project, the Reeser Creek was pretty much just a straight channel or canal through this place, and there was a lot of flooding that would flood into West Ellensburg. But with this project, it kind of created a more natural flow of the creek, and so it would flow onto the floodplain and create wetlands. And so our focus was on beavers, and beavers act as ecosystem engineers. They help control quantity and quality of water downstream, and the ponds and wetlands that are created create habitat for many plants and animals, like fish, birds, insects, and amphibians. They also promote infiltration and more groundwater. And their dams that they produce slow the flow of water to create wetland for 85% of North American fauna that rely on these wetlands. So our research question in our investigation was, would the restored Reeser Creek floodplain provide sufficient habitat to sustain a beaver population? And our hypothesis was that no, it would not provide a proper habitat for the beavers.
So in order to determine whether or not the habitat would be proper for beaver populations, we had to conduct a survey. So the first survey that we conducted was we walked along the creek and we looked for signs of beaver activity. This includes things like damming, slides, and chew. Then we created a scale, which is shown here, that combines several factors that contribute to ideal beaver populations. So as you can see here, some of the factors include things like cover, vegetation, grade, depth, and speed of water. And so with this survey, we got some of these numbers for the ideals from Alaska Department of Fish and Game, as well as the Library of National Wetlands Research Center. So with this chart, we were able to go along the creek and survey several points every 50 feet or so, and we were able to take notes on whether or not these points fulfilled these ideals. We also did a more thorough survey of vegetation where we looked for certain species and certain size of trees. And we determined that the most important factor in having a healthy beaver population is having ideal trees, meaning the correct species and having them be large enough to create dams and things like that. So yes, we were able to take our data concerning beaver activity and cross-reference it with our data concerning ideals of beaver habitat, and we were able to confirm our hypothesis.
So these graphs show the results of our surveys. The top graph refers to the more mature section where we knew there was an established beaver population, including a lodge and a few dams. The lower right-hand corner shows beaver activity and evaluation on the Reeser Creek floodplain, which is the restored section. The blue line indicates the amount of beaver activity that we put on a scale that we could compare to the habitat quality. So as you can see on the upper left graph, there's significantly more activity due to the active beaver population. And on the lower right-hand corner, there's considerably less activity. You can also see in the upper left-hand corner that it has a consistently higher habitat rating. Our evaluation stays in the 3 to 4 zone, which is ideal to good. The Reeser Creek floodplain, however, fluctuates. It gets to okay conditions, which is about a 3 at several points. In the middle, you can see the habitat declines pretty sharply, and in that area, there's almost no beaver activity. So this shows us that the Reeser Creek floodplain at no point was in the blue zone, or the zone that was able to support a lodge of a population of beavers. However, there was a lot of activity on the floodplain, which we didn't expect as much. This shows that that habitat had progressed to the point where beavers were willing to eat there and graze there and hang out there a little bit. But those were most likely foragers from the lodge upstream. The main habitat failings, what gave it a lower rating, was consistently just the absence of mature trees. None of them, we had found very few trees with a diameter of larger than 2 or 3 inches. That means with further maturation, the floodplain could support a beaver population.
All right, so in conclusion, looking at the results, we know that there is a colony of beavers in the Reeser Creek area, but not currently lodging on the floodplain. We believe that with time, though, the mature section and maybe possibly beavers could move down to the Reeser Creek floodplain, but it will take time. Since the floodplain is only around 8 years old, a lot of the trees haven't had time to develop, and with time, those trees will be able to grow and able to support dams and other structures, and we believe a beaver colony could possibly reside in the floodplain. We are happy to say that our scale did accurately predict whether beaver activity would correlate with the quality of the habitat, but we do think that it could get tweaked slightly to become more accurate. Another problem is that the southern section of the Reeser Creek floodplain, there is been new evidence of a dam, which is a big step towards a more prominent colony. But the DOT is currently planning on dynamiting this dam due to possible structural damage to the highway. This could severely limit the ability of the stream to continue to develop and benefit and get the benefits from having beavers in the ecosystem.
Thank you. Do you guys have any questions?
Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to pursue this project? Why this question?
All right, so our environmental studies class, every year the students are asked to design questions to kind of check up on the creek area and see how it's progressing. And we noticed that as the creek had progressed, none of the experiments had progressed to measuring perhaps larger mammal impacts. They were mostly about water quality, and we thought that the creek indicated that maybe it could be a complete ecosystem soon.
So to follow up on that, if you were going to hand this research project off to next year's environmental science class, what would you suggest they take on as their next question?
I think just making sure that there is more restoration effort and not just leaving it where it is. So just making sure that we can do our part and not just like letting it develop over time, but making sure that we are doing our part to help with that.
It's also cool that we've been able to leave a fairly accurate habitat indicator so they can, future years can continue to check up on the progression of the stream and make sure that we know what to do if things start failing.
Do the beaver activity have any effect on fish populations?
So another group in our class actually studied whether we had salmon and other fish populations that we hadn't seen there before, and they actually found quite a few young fish, which is good. Beaver dams are pretty good for fish because they allow like slower area and more cover with felled trees, so those work together well.
Do any of you have any interest in pursuing a wildlife career?
I would definitely like to study environmental sciences and pursue environmental science when I grow up.
So you mentioned that were you planting more trees in the area or trees being planted, or yes or no?
Yeah, the environmental club at our school is actually participating in that and has been for a while.
So would it be necessary to bring in more populations of the beavers? Like, would you have to infiltrate more, or would they naturally come to that location?
I think if we gave more time, there's a lot of diversity of plants, and there's definitely enough plant life if they just developed over a couple more years to sustain the beavers and make the population larger. So.
Right. And the area with an established lodge is about a couple miles upstream of the developing area, so beavers are definitely coming down on their own. The issue might be that the Department of Transportation is going to move them out of that area.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
As part of the National FFA organization contest called the Agricultural Issues Forum. What it does is it has students select a topic that is particularly contentious, and their job is to equitably represent both sides of the issue. This year's issue is a natural resources issues, and in the past we've done a number of different types of issues. But this one connects very well with what's going on in regards to climate change. I wish the governor could have hung around, because this is exactly about the task force that he set up with the southern resident killer whales. So I just ask that you tune in for about 15 minutes. At the end of the presentation, if there's any questions from the Alliance or anybody from the audience, that's what we're looking for here as well. So I want to thank you all for giving us the chance, and I'll let these guys go.
On a calm, cool morning, on the waters of Washington's Puget Sound, the silence is broken by the breaching and sounding of one of Washington's most recognizable icons, the killer whale, Orcanis orca, or orca whale, has long been an image that many Pacific Northwesterners akin themselves to. This majestic creature is not only synonymous with these Washington residents, but is one of the most culturally significant animals to Northwest indigenous tribes, dating back to as far as native art and oral history goes.
These whales, actually the largest members of the dolphin family, are no strangers to this ecosystem. These orcas are the Salish Sea's top predator. Consuming nearly 400 pounds of feed a day, these mammals swim the crowded waters of the Puget Sound, foraging for their primary food source of Chinook salmon. This couple, forever tied together culturally and ecologically, now found themselves tied together politically.
Wait, Kim, how can these animals share a political affiliation? Is this an Obama versus Mitt Romney situation? Or a Trump versus, well, everybody? How do the politics of ecology work? Who's involved? How did we get here? What is the issue? And most importantly, why should inland Northwesterners care about what's going on off the coastal waters of Washington State?
In March of 2018, Governor Jay Inslee signed into effect Executive Order 1802, forming the Southern Resident Killer Whale Recovery Task Force, which directs state agencies to implement actions to benefit the southern resident orcas. This task force was charged with the development of recommendations to identify, prioritize, and support the implementations of both long and short-term action plans for the recovery of southern resident killer whales, and in November of 2018 made 36 recommendations to state legislators to consider for the 2019 through 2021 biennium.
What lies at the root of the issue is nutrition. Prey availability, coupled with disruptions to orcas' ability to hunt, have led to large-scale malnutrition of the few orcapods. This difficulty in consuming enough calories has had dire consequences.
So here's the question. Is Washington doing enough to save Puget Sound's southern resident killer whales?
Proponents of southern resident recovery identify 4 key threats to the Puget Sound's orcas: lack of prey, disturbance, noise, and vessel traffic, toxic contaminants, as well as global climate change. The ultimate goal of the task force is to ensure a healthy and resilient ecosystem that supports a thriving southern resident population and prevents extinction.
The opponents of southern resident killer whale recovery are, in fact, not necessarily opponents to recovery, but rather opponents to the methods, timeliness, finances, and priorities in and surrounding the issue. We argue that some recommendations might have gone too far, and some not far enough.
Southern resident killer whale populations travels in pods from southeast Alaska to central California, but spend the majority of their time near the San Juan Islands of Washington State. These Pacific orcas were classified as endangered under the Species at Risk Act in 2003 by Canada, state listed by Washington in 2004, and federally listed as endangered by the U.S. in 2005.
Proponents support the idea that salmon recovery in Washington state is a key component to orca recovery. They report that decades-long trending decline in Chinook population has led to large-scale malnutrition in the 3 orca pods.
In addition, in order to be diverse, sustainable, and abundant, Chinook salmon need to have a productive and protected habitat that meets both their reproductive and nutritional needs. Continued work at opening new habitat, enhancing and improving both the access and quality of existing habitats is a must.
Adding to the complexity of ecosystem dynamics is the introduction of man-made structures on and around Columbia's main stem Chinook habitat, affecting not only salmon, but forage fish alike. The arguments based around fish passage and habitat restoration are paramount to recovery efforts.
Not only that, Tyler, but competition plays a key role in recovery efforts and salmon availability as well. These already slim numbers of Chinook are being preyed upon by other predators, such as seals and sea lions. This increased inland pinniped predation has had devastating impacts on Chinook populations.
According to joint research done by the Bonneville Power Administration, NOAA, and the Army Corps of Engineers, from 2002 to present, pinniped population in the lower Columbia estuary has increased from just a few hundred animals to over 4,000 today. These astonishingly high numbers, coupled with unexplained reductions in Chinook returns ranging from 11 to 43%, paint a pretty gloomy picture.
These mammals are overpopulated, and coastal and estuary concentrations continue to increase due largely to protections afforded to them by the Marine Mammal Protection Act.
Let's be straightforward here. More fish equals more food. More food equals more calories being pumped into the ecosystem. More calories equals healthier orcas. Healthier orcas equals a mammal population more capable of reproduction. And increased reproduction equals positive steps towards southern resident killer whale recovery targets.
Not to help the proponents make their arguments, but according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, 7 of the 12 genetically distinguishable Chinook salmon populations that are targeted by southern resident killer whales originate in the inland Northwest. More specifically, the Upper Columbia and its tributaries. Again, forever linking inland Northwest salmon to these creatures.
Josh, you need to figure out what side you're on. Inland Northwest salmon recovery has been a topic of discussion for decades. And if there was a silver bullet that everyone could agree upon for specific, financially prudent, and politically correct remedies, it would be done. The fact is that salmon recovery becomes so complex, so politically charged, that it becomes so convoluted that even supporters of recovery become opponents within their arguments. So, until proponents can develop a united front, what's the use?
We opponents argue that much of the recovery work has already been done. Spending more on recovery, which already exceeds $1 billion over the past 2 decades, specifically Upper Columbia recovery, is simply not prudent. Even though small-scale reintroduction efforts have been undertaken by state, federal, and tribal organizations, there's still too much uncertainty that throwing more money at an issue will do any good. It just doesn't forecast much optimism.
Opponents do agree that habitat restoration is key to prolonged and sustainable survival of salmon in the Northwest. But with degradation of habitat occurring over the past 100 years, there is no quick fix. At least not quick enough to provide the cover for the juvenile salmon and forage fish numbers that would sustain the orcas.
Opponents argue further yet that simply pumping more fish into the system will do more damage than it does good. Increasing hatchery production will flood the system with fish that lack the reproductive fitness of the native Chinook. And as they integrate into the reproductive profile of the native population, they actually work counterproductive to anticipated goals.
These hatchery fish have the unintended consequences of decreasing genetic life history patterns, competing with native juvenile stocks for resources, as well as attracting predators at key release times. Throwing more fish at the problem turns out to be a lot like throwing more money at it.
Josh and Jesse, you just showed the audience how commingled proponents and opponents are on this issue. We opponents are not actually adversaries. We are, in fact, strange bedfellows when it comes to the methods, timeliness, and finances in and surrounding the issue. However, this decades-long infighting only muddies the waters and further complicates recovery. But what is clear is that something must be done.
What about proponents' proposals in regards to vessel noise and traffic? The geography of the Salish Sea, in particular Puget Sound, makes for some tight quarters when it comes to sharing the waters.
In order to fully understand the significant impacts of vessel noise and traffic, the audience must first understand that these whales are a genetically unique subspecies whose diet consists strictly of salmon, unlike transient killer whales who feed mostly on larger aquatic species. Southern resident killer whales are confined, some might say condemned, by their adaptations and learned behaviors.
These same Chinook, well recognized as a key component in the killer whale's diet, have still not rebounded despite continued efforts by state, tribal, and federal entities, and are at an all-time low in population since records began in 1984.
All orcas, not just southern residents, utilize a complex method of biosonar called echolocation to locate prey, navigate the waters they occupy, and communicate with other pod members. Besides the audible clicks, squeaks, and squeals, echolocation can be affected by even the most quiet of vessels.
Right, Tyler. From kayaks and canoes to barges and the largest tanker or cargo ship, these orcas struggle to find prey due to increased boat traffic within the Salish Sea.
Exactly, Kim. Marine conservationist and Oceans Initiative co-founder Rob Williams said in an interview, "As ship noise increases, it's literally, not metaphorically, it's literally shrinking the whale's world. The noise level of their surroundings influences the orcas. The higher the ambient noise, the less likely they will vocalize. And unfortunately, a reliable way to predict how background noise affects the orcas has not been determined."
Good job. Has not been determined? Good job, Shane. You just made our argument for us. These whales have coexisted with shipping and recreational boat use for, well, centuries. If orca behavioral adaptations have not evolved to the point where they can share these waters, perhaps a change in scenery needs to be in their very near future.
Wildlife that does not have the ability to adapt and coexist in an ecosystem with human presence, unfortunately, may not be long for this world. We opponents are not insensitive to the plight of the whales. In fact, some of us are real proponents to recovery. But know this, the task force's recommendations regarding boat traffic are missing the mark.
The recommendation of implementing a go-slow zone will only reduce efficiency of commercial shipping operations, and in turn, have the potential to affect profitability of all port districts within the Sound. Additionally, the recommendation of implementing an additional $10 fee to all existing and future boat registrations to help fund education and enforcement activities simply lays the burden of financing some recovery efforts on a wider base.
So, whether you're a San Juan Island vacation boater or an inland Northwest river and lake fisherman, you're now potentially on the hook for an additional fee every time you license your boat.
Most concerning, though, is the 11th hour edition of the moratorium on commercial and recreational whale watching in the Salish Sea. Ecotourism professionals who have already implemented self-imposed guidelines in regards to how they interact with these pods believe that the task force is cutting off their nose despite their face here.
Right, Jesse. These professionals are much more than just tourism. They educate thousands of voyagers annually on the spirit of conservation and work to instill an appreciation for marine wildlife of all kinds. Additionally, the presence of their vessels serve as an alert to other boats that orcas are nearby.
It's clear that both sides share a common goal on this issue, but wow, they couldn't be further apart on how issues should be addressed. Sounds like the process needs some cleaning up.
You know what needs cleaning up, Rylan? The Puget Sound. One of the primary goals of the task force is to prevent the further use and release of toxins that could harm the orcas. Orcas are at the top of the marine food web, and as a result, run the most risk of accumulating toxins as they move and magnify up the food chain.
Toxic contaminants become even more damaging to orcas when coupled with widespread malnutrition. As body conditions decrease, whales pull energy out of fat supplies, which is where the highest concentration of contaminants lie. If fully nourished, not as much trouble, but if under or malnourished, it becomes a double-edged sword as toxic contaminants accumulate in both forage fish and salmon.
So, not only are they struggling to find enough fish, and when they do so, the chances of them being contaminated are pretty high, essentially making it a double whammy when it comes to prey and contaminants. Further recommendations include accelerated bans on polychlorinated biphenyls, further identification of the chemical impacts on prey, reduction of stormwater threats, and continued work at monitoring toxic substances.
We opponents agree that the cleaning up, maintaining, and preventing toxic conditions in the Puget Sound makes for sound policy. But know this, the unintended consequences for how these recommendations are to be implemented could cause some real problems.
The fine print on these recommendations call for some potentially big problems. And just like the water contamination issues, identifying the true culprit is often an impossibility.
Broad sweeping policy changes have the potential to sour the public support of this mission to save southern resident killer whales. Making adversaries of allies can slow recovery work and be counterproductive to timely recovery efforts.
Speaking of slow, Josh, we haven't even addressed the ongoing issue of climate change. Slow and steady increases in oceanic temperatures may very well be linked to the irregularities in salmon run behavior and numbers, and in turn affect the orcas as they forage for prey.
Zane, control the controllables. We opponents argue that recommendations related to climate change, while important, may not have enough of an impact soon enough to save these struggling populations. And at the end of the day, none of us may have any control over a changing global climate.
It's clear that southern resident killer whale recovery is complicated and controversial. Proponents argue that recovery efforts must start now in order to save these struggling populations.
We argue that some broad sweeping changes in policy must be implemented now so that future efforts and long-term recovery targets can be met. We also identify that increased prey availability, reduction of boat traffic and noise, as well as developing strategies to help reduce toxins is a must in order for Washingtonians to continue to enjoy one of the Pacific Northwest's most iconic figures.
Opponents, however, disagree. Not so much to recovery, but how priorities, policies, and procedures have been and will be implemented.
We argue that many of the recommendations set forth by the task force cast too big of a net, and the unintended or intended consequences not only reach further than needed, but they are politically charged. We question a number of the recommendations set forth and believe that they are based on too many other factors and not just good science.
With all this dissension on methods, policy, and consequences, the question still remains. Is Washington doing enough to save Puget Sound southern resident killer whales? That decision is up to you. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Where are you guys at? Where do you stand on removing some dams?
So actually, I'm not so sure that I'm for removing the dams, because one of the recommendations actually is to reestablish salmon runs above dams like Chief Joe and Grand Coulee. So, because above those dams you have 1,100 miles of prime habitat that hasn't been used for that type of stuff in years. And if you find a way to get through the dams without taking them out, like getting them over the dams, that will in turn bring more food to the orcas and increase the population.
Just to add on to that, the Ag Issues Forum is something that we've been doing for many years, and my brother's actually on a team 2 years back that their main topic was reintroduction of salmon into the Northwest. And one of the topics that they really researched, and this really ties right back into STEM, is the whoosh system. It's basically just a tube that sucks the fish up and over the dam. And it just goes to show that there are technologies being researched that will get us to the same goal without having to take such drastic measures.
So, not so much about the content of you were talking about, but how you all developed your presentation. Do you all actually, are you aligned proponents, opponents, or was it for the nature of the conversation? And how long did it take for you to develop this exceptional presentation that you collectively did?
So speaking for myself, I kind of jump in on both sides. I think because I don't have to make the decision, I'm just here to play along with it. So I don't have a side because both sides have some pretty good arguments. But to answer your question, how long it took, we actually did a presentation last year, and so usually the Ag 3-4 class, so it's your juniors and seniors, and they do issues because there's a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of presentations like this where you have to leave school to do that. And we decided that, hey, we're going to do it as sophomores, and so we did it on Bigfoot, but that's just a fun fact. But it takes like, I don't know, we start at the beginning of the year picking a topic, 5-6 weeks just reading and learning about it, and then together we start writing the script, and then our ag teacher tells us everything we did wrong, which is a lot. And yeah, and then we fix it, and then we start presenting, and yeah.
And to add on to that, this is actually a very revised version of where we started out at the beginning. We had a complete presentation done and we had presented to a couple groups, and we came together and we figured that a lot of things needed to be changed. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, and this wasn't our first draft, I guess.
Probably won't be our last. But nice seeing you guys, really.